I think first of all, it'd be great to give some very brief introductions. So from me, as you said, my name is Jean-Louis Bartlett. I'm a Sustainability Advisory Team Leader for Arcadis in the UK and Ireland. I'm an Associate Technical Director with about 10 years of experience in the industry, post having actually studied at UE. So I'll hand over quickly to Michael for intros.
Hi, I'm Michael Horswell. I'm co-program leader of our BSc Honours degree in Environmental Management and also the BSc Honours Environmental Practitioner degree apprenticeship. I've been an academic for about 20 years, and before that was involved in environmental consultancy in various capacities. I think Nevil is finishing off an external examination commitment at the moment. I'm not sure whether he's here, but he's a professor of applied hydrology who has been in academia for quite a while and was part of the team that collaborated in the development of our environmental management programs at UE.
Perfect. And Hollie?
Hello everyone, I currently sit on Arcadis's Sustainability Advisory team as a degree apprentice, and I am also a student at UE where I'm currently studying my degree in environmental management.
Thanks. Just to show what we're going to go over today quickly, I'm going to give a very brief overview. I think we've touched on most of it actually, so I might skip over my slides. But essentially just, net zero skills, what as an industry we want to see, what's really important to be able to deliver net zero. I'll hand over to Michael and Nevil to give a bit of an overview of the degree apprenticeship that UE does in Bristol, and then we'll get a perspective from Hollie, who is currently studying the degree at UE and then also working with us at Arcadis. So yeah, just to quickly dive into it, I won't bother with introductions to Arcadis really, but yeah, essentially we work within the consultancy space in terms of sustainability and net zero. In terms of an overview of what a net zero journey looks like, we typically have a baseline of emissions on the left hand side of this graph, which is very different for each different company. We have a business as usual trajectory, and then what implications policy, regulation and supply chain may have on that trajectory. And then there's typically a gap, and that's where we need to focus our efforts to achieve net zero. So I've set out some key elements to achieve down the left-hand side of the slide. So a clear definition, a credible pathway supported by real data, but whilst also being transparent about assumptions. And then investment will be a key part to change. So that's really important, as well as being able to track and report progress accurately. I've put at the bottom that there's a challenge. It is a big challenge. It's not going to be easy, but it's actually a really exciting opportunity as well. So some of the challenges that sit under here are the fact that there is a skill gap. So we'll be touching on that today and have been covering that today. There's technology challenges, so the development and employment of new technology, renewables, heat decarbonisation, carbon capture and storage, all sorts. There's cost implications, there's the understanding of the political landscape, there's behaviour and society change, as well as making sure that changes that we make are equitable, and making sure there's no social implications when going through this process. In terms of how we do it at Arcadis, we tend to use this little approach here where we combine the technical knowledge to develop a strategy with embedding practical experience to make sure that we implement projects to get on the journey towards net zero. So it's broken down into 4 stages. I won't go into in huge detail here, but essentially the approach recognizes that we need to understand data, we need to identify innovative solutions and support stakeholders on that journey. Stakeholders are a key part, so communications come up quite a few times in this call so far. To really embed things, I think is extremely important. We can make a really nice strategy and plan, but it won't land and nothing will actually be done unless you bring people on the journey. So we need a really robust change management program, and that talks to key stakeholders from the highest people in organizations all the way down to the most junior members as well, to bring them on that journey through strong communication, training, and also behavior change programs. So in terms of how we go about delivering this, we really need, as an industry, as a society, really, we need people that have a passion about it, but then also these following skills and attributes. So I'll just run through them quickly, but as I said, they've been covered quite a lot already. So a strong technical underpinning is really important. So UE and other universities offer a range of courses, from apprenticeships to master's degrees and PhDs. An understanding of carbon accounting, management and reporting, and the wider sustainability context is that first point. We really need that. I've named just a few sort of standards and things that we tend to ask for when you see a job spec. So they're the things for experience, or at least understanding, to bear in mind. We have the need for good analysis and analytical skills. So this is the ability to understand and communicate large data sets. Yes, we do have to use data. So you don't necessarily need to be a statistician or a mathematics expert, but some experience in working in data sets and drawing reasonable conclusions is really important. Strategic thinking. So this was touched on earlier again, in terms of bringing your imagination, bring innovation to the table and test the boundaries. We need new ideas to meet this challenge. We can't continue business as usual. We won't get anywhere. I think digital does play a good role in that as well. So there's a great opportunity to drive efficiencies and maximize impacts through digital options. So potentially bring that to the table as well. In terms of business skills and interpersonal skills, these have been referred to as, I guess, soft skills so far. I don't like the term soft skills either, but I think they are incredibly important, the skills that tend to fall under that name. We are a business. We need to have that context of the business, and we're working towards a common goal. Interpersonal skills, teamwork, work ethic, communication, again, is really important. And that's both written and verbal. We actually do still have people that need convincing that net zero is an issue, and we need to bring them on that journey. So being able to communicate to different audiences, trying to translate that complex issue into something that everyone can understand is paramount. In terms of diversity, here, I'm talking about a diverse skill set. Backgrounds as well bring really strong, bring strengths to our team as well. But what I'm talking about here mainly is the diverse skill set. So we have technical people, really detail-orientated people. We have people that are more generalists. We have people that are more involved in the sort of business side of things, people that are more process-driven. Essentially, the more diverse the team, the better it is, really. We need to, I think it was mentioned earlier about trying not to pigeonhole people. That is really key, and you'll find your niche and you'll play to your strengths over time. At the beginning of your career, try to get involved as much as you can. Don't know what happened there. So In terms of growth mindset, it's something that Arcadis is really passionate about. So we always look for people that are looking to learn and improve. We're going to get things wrong. New things, particularly in sustainability, come up every week. You know, we need to be flexible, adaptable, and have that drive to push this agenda. And then finally, from me, is that demonstrated interest in this area. So memberships to institutes like IES, volunteering for relevant organizations, doing internships, work experience. I know you do a lot of this through work placements, so that's how I started off my career. You know, really demonstrating that it's not just an interest, but it's a bit more of a passion. And I think, you know, many people on this call would have that by attending the call. So with that, I'll hand over to Michael and Neville.
Right, thank you. I think we can have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to very briefly outline a little bit about the development of the technical standard for the degree apprenticeship itself, because it was a very good example of collaboration between industry and academia. I'm not going to go into any particular detail, except that it was sort of the initial development of the standard started in about 2018 or 2019. That's going back and looking at the dates of some of my related files. It was had a very large number of stakeholders involved in the development of that standard. Could I have the next slide, please? This is one of the headlines. I'm not going to read it out, but I think it's quite interesting if you look at the set of bullet points of the sort of the priorities that are specified in the standard itself. And while I wouldn't dispute any of their validity at all or their importance, climate change is one of many. And what we're talking about today or focused on is one element of climate change. And it's interesting that sort of net zero or more detailed about being responsive to climate change wasn't given greater emphasis in the development of the specification. But I think it illustrates quite well how rapidly things are changing in the context of environmental management practice and how priorities change, for example. And so part of what I think makes an effective environmental management practitioner is being able to respond to situations, develop new skills. So although that headline is interesting, it's certainly not an exhaustive list. I don't think it shouldn't be interpreted as such of what an environmental practitioner should be aiming for. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into any of the particular details. There is a QR code there that can be scanned to see the full technical specification. But there are 15 duties that have been identified as would be part of routine professional activity of a degree apprenticeship on completion of the apprenticeship, 12 knowledge outcomes, 12 skills outcomes, and 7 behavioral outcomes. And we've talked about knowledge and skills and behaviors quite a lot, and I'm going to say a little bit more about it as well as I continue. But they are identified, but these sort of 31 outcomes are what the apprentices are assessed by in their endpoint assessment, which is the final element of the 5-year apprenticeship. Next slide, please. And the next one. So this is just talking a little bit about knowledge, skills, and behaviors, I guess, framed in a slightly different way. This underpins the design of not just the degree apprenticeship, but I would say a lot of the programs in the environmental field. So that would include geography and our BSc honours in environmental management specifically. And what we maybe have been talking about in terms of knowledge, it fits in that specialist purple part of the sunburst diagram. So, you would expect people to have knowledge within their subject specialism, be able to engage with any relevant laboratory techniques or field methods. We've mentioned data management as a specific element in environmental management as well. Quantitative methods, I think we take for granted in environmental sciences, but increasingly, and when we think about the communication element, then qualitative methods and social sciences and engagement with people in a way that facilitates behavioral change, which ultimately is what we're trying to affect, become really important as well. I've talked about generic skills in the next sort of element of that pie, and this is communication. There are traditional ideas of literacy and sort of numeracy. I think the one that's interesting here that is included is the idea that this communication has to be persuasive. It's not enough for us as scientists and as graduates to be able to communicate our science effectively to other scientists. I think it's probably one of the most profound concerns I have about the way in which a response to climate change has rolled out globally, is how very few of the education or communication initiatives have really been successful. And I think the climate stripe, Ed Hawkins' climate stripes in this regard, have really made a difference to presenting very complex information, huge data sets in just the most accessible way. But being persuasive in our communication, not just competent, is something worth thinking about. We've also talked about behavioral competencies, and some of these are the types of behaviors we would expect people to just exhibit as in their professional practice, like being organized. We've mentioned collaboration specifically. I've added health and safety awareness because that's also been there. But then we've got confidence, which has been mentioned. I think that's a really important one, particularly in the context of a discipline that is changing. That's confidence to move with those changes and develop the knowledge that's required in order to remain a useful and contributing member of a scientific community. We've also talked about resilience. That's both professional and emotional resilience. I think climate anxiety has been mentioned, and it's really important, I think, as educators in this field, that we are presenting the situation as honestly and as fully as we can, but also equipping students and supporting them as they deal with the implications of the knowledge that we are presenting. Influencing is probably the practical arm of being a persuasive communicator. Also being ethical and sustainable. So in our degree programs, one of the first things we start off with is examining the values of each cohort in the induction activities in level 1, and so that they can start to situate themselves in the discipline. And I think this ties in with what Gary was saying about the positionality of researchers and positionality of scientists. Finally, getting a culture of lifelong learning, it's essential. Somebody said every day is a school day, and that's certainly true in environmental sciences. Cognitive skills, again, I think these are ones that we would expect. The one I'm going to draw out is creative. And as we understand the situation and how our responses to the situation have to change, we need to not just be able to apply what we've learned to situations, but we need to go beyond what we've learned and think about it perhaps in integrating different elements, but coming up with creative and appropriate responses to the challenges. And then the cognitive sort of scientific tools. And these might only become more directly emphasized in sort of the later years of a degree program, but to be skeptical, this has also been mentioned, not to take for granted even what we as teachers teach our students, but to be skeptical about knowledge. Where does it come from? How was it developed? And so on. To be critical and reflexive. Being reflexive, I think, is part of being sort of ethical and sustainable, and understanding your own position and how you develop it as a professional over time. And then finally, some philosophical awareness. As scientists, I think having some idea of the ideas of philosophy of science, certainly if you're in a postgraduate situation, is really important, so that you can start to question not just what you know, but also the mechanisms by which, how we come to know things in the first place. So that's a sort of a broad view of how we are responding to equipping people to working in this quite complex social environmental sort of nexus. So it's not about environmental science per se, nor is it about social science or political science perhaps as well, but about how those social and environmental systems interact across spatial and temporal scales. So we need scientific knowledge, we need technical skills, policy and legislative awareness as well, and that's at multi-scales, and understanding how they work at different scales as well. And then behavioral understanding and also organizational insight. If we're trying to move individuals within an organization along a net zero pathway, we've got to understand how that organization works, but also how individuals within that organization are going to respond to whatever might be suggested. So next slide, please. This is just our program structure. And what I'd like to say about this is, once the technical specification had drawn up, when we were developing the apprenticeship program, we had further discussions with potential employers of apprentices or people employing apprentices, to try and ensure that what we were offering was suitable for their needs. And so as we developed our modules or units of learning, then the learning outcomes and the assessment strategies were reviewed by some of the potential employers. So I'll draw attention to a few. Now, I've got lots of module specs in front of me, so I've tried to produce some summaries. So environmentalism, society and governance is a broad introduction, and it's one where we particularly look at allowing students to think about their own values, their own environmental values, and how that maybe fits in with larger environmental ethical frameworks. And we do quite a lot on the history of environmentalism, environmental ethics, and then how society and governance interact, and that's from sort of global initiatives like the Montreal Protocol to transboundary water management to much smaller things. So that is quite a getting to know yourself as a potential environmental practitioner module. Then there's a balance that is essential if you accept the departure point of wanting to respond to both the social and environmental science elements. So sustainable technologies and analyzing environmental change, introduction to GIS and remote sensing are sort of technical and science-specific responses to the context. But then we also have modules about engaging communities and institutions, and the assessments in most of these public engagement type of modules are always driven around a problem-based learning cycle. So an example would be environmental management in organizations, where we embed our students in different service departments within the universities, and they try and improve their environmental performance. So they do the full problem-based learning cycle, which goes from reviewing the situation, planning a response, implementing it, assessing the outcome, communicating that, and then finally reflecting on what they've learned as individuals in that process of that contextual professional response. So we try and embed that as much as we can. And those are across the first 3 core years of the degree apprenticeship, but they're also built into the BSc honours that we offer. And then we have pathways. Sustainability is sort of the broadest of those. We maintain that balance between environmental science and social science throughout the pathways. I won't go into any of those modules in particular detail, except to say that that's sort of the ethos of having authentic assessments that replicate the type of activities that students would be expected to complete once they're employed is a fundamental sort of part of how the entire program was conceived. Next slide, please. And now I can hand over to Hollie.
That's perfect, thank you. Can I just have my first slide, please? So just to give a bit of background on my apprenticeship, I joined Arcadis September 2021. As I said previously, I'm studying a degree in environmental management. This is a 5-year course, and I have just finished my 2nd year of studying. So during term time, my current setup is to go into UE once a week to attend lectures. And then the rest of the week I spend working for Arcadis. Outside of term time, this then goes up to 5 days a week with Arcadis. So this essentially gives me the opportunity to expand my knowledge at UE on relevant areas in environmentalism, and then see how this is put into practice in consultancy. And if I can just have the next slide, then you'll see that I've decided just to give an overview of 2 net zero related projects that I have been involved in this year, as well as the skills and resources that I've been able to pick up from these projects. So the first project I picked out was the City of London Design Standards. So for this project, the client had a net zero target of 2027 in the city corporation's operations and 2040 across their full value chain and square mile. They particularly wanted to focus on minimizing greenhouse gas emissions throughout the life cycle of their new developments and major refurbishment projects. So we therefore created a set of design standards which City of London and developers within the square mile would be able to use going forward to make informed decisions on how to implement sustainable principles into their future development projects. And in helping to create these design standards, I was then introduced to various best practice documents from sources such as BREEAM and LETI. And I was able to review these documents and consolidate the key information, which was then mapped against each REBA stage and integrated into the design standards. The second project I picked out was the Armagh Observatory Whole Life Carbon Assessment. So for this project, the client was looking to improve the long-term sustainability of their asset through the development of their observatory and planetarium based on 4 options. And these ranged from maintenance and replacement works to a complete new build. And our job was to carry out a whole life carbon assessment for each of these options. And as part of that, I was introduced to the one-click LCA tool, which I used to model the embodied carbon for each option. So that was just a quick overview of the type of net zero related projects I get involved in. And if I can just have my next slide. So this is sort of following on from Louis' slide on the skill sets that employers are looking for. And I thought I'd just go through them and comment on where I think I'm developing those skills. So for a strong technical underpinning, I take this to mean a solid foundation knowledge in net zero, which I think both UE and Arcadis are providing me with. So from Arcadis' side, I have been introduced to relevant best practice documents, and I've displayed a few examples of these on the left of the slide. I've also been introduced to online tools such as one-click LCA. And in terms of the knowledge UE has provided me with, I remember particularly in my first year, I was introduced to scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, what falls under these, as well as the carbon management hierarchy, which looks at which actions to prioritise when reducing emissions. We also looked at the UK Net Zero strategy and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it was topic areas like these which gave me that necessary level of knowledge, which I've been able to build upon since. Analytical skills and my ability to understand and communicate data sets has been massively developed by UE. So in the air, land and water module that we've completed this year with Nevil, we've undertaken a lot of practical work involving downloading data sets and then analysing and presenting these in Excel. Which I found incredibly helpful, as before starting this module, I knew only the bare minimum of how to use Excel. And since this module, I've been a lot more efficient when carrying out data analysis. For business and interpersonal skills, I feel like this is something I've been able to pick up at both Arcadis and UE. So at UE, we get involved in a lot of presentations, both individually and as part of a group, which has helped to strengthen my communication and presentation skills. And similarly with Arcadis, I'm able to work within the sustainability advisory team, as well as communicate with clients both online and in person. In terms of a growth mindset, this again is something I've been able to develop both at Arcadis and UE. I feel I'm able to continually improve in both environments, whether that be through seeking feedback from assignments, completing relevant training, or upskilling in new tools or areas within Arcadis. And then finally, a demonstrated interest. I put this as other, as I feel this is up to the individual to show. So for example, when I first joined Arcadis, I had been volunteering for the Cotswold National Landscape and Western Butt Arboretum for a few years at that point. And I also know both Arcadis and UE allow you to become a member of various environmental institutions. And consequently, I've been using these resources to help me to complete my CPD log, which again is another way of demonstrating interest. And I'm aware of the time, so I think that's me finished.
Thanks very much, Hollie.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody.